Social dialogue in defense of vulnerable groups in the post-COVID-19 labor markets. The COVID-19 pandemic caused job losses and income reduction, leaving many people in the labor market in a vulnerable position. Some were vulnerable to poverty and job losses even before, and the pandemic further worsened their situation. There was uncertainty on how to safeguard vulnerable people and how to develop effective protection policies with the help of trade unions and employers. The Defen-ce project, funded by the European Union, analysed the governance of vulnerable groups in the labour markets during and after the COVID-19 pandemic in 12 countries.
Let's now focus on the main findings for Serbia and Turkey. During the pandemic, apart from its traditional realm of insecure, temporary, low-paid, often informal jobs, vulnerable labor market groups spread to categories of workers that are not considered vulnerable in normal times. By combining the labor force survey data and findings from the interviews, we can highlight several vulnerable groups in Serbia. Informal workers, young, workers hired through atypical contracts, workers with fixed-term contracts, women, healthcare and workers in essential services, parents with young kids and self-employed were the most affected by the pandemic. Serbian government adopted a peculiar set of support measures in response to the pandemic. The measures were financially generous and at the same time, probably the most universalistic worldwide. Among them, the most important was the multiple flat-rate payments of a net minimum wage for each full-time employee. The other major set of measures were universal and unconditional financial assistance for all adult persons and some additional assistance for different population groups like pensioners, youth, and registered unemployed. Finally, some assistance is also provided to the companies in the most affected sectors like hoteliers, travel agencies, and bus carriers. The non-state social partners played a very limited role during the health crisis. Especially at the beginning of the pandemic, all strategic decisions on anti-COVID measures were adopted unilaterally by the government. The government continues to play a dominant role in social dialogue at the later stage, and the involvement of the social partners was mainly at a consultative level or even less than that. The pandemic has shown that more mutual respect and recognition as well as solidarity among non-government social partners are needed in order to provide enough power to shift the pendulum from the state side to the side of the social partners. At first, we need to see who are the vulnerable groups most affected by COVID-19 in Turkey. It is safe to say that COVID-19 affected everyone. However, there are various social and labor market groups whose vulnerabilities increased immensely during the pandemic. 9 Turkish organizations, including trade unions, employer associations, and civil society organizations, were interviewed to understand who are the most vulnerable groups. As a result, women, youth, elderly, frontline workers, informal and daily wage workers, refugees, and other marginalized groups were identified as carrying higher risks in the labor markets, and COVID-19 elevated these risks. Turkish government adopted some measures to protect these vulnerable groups. Majority of the measures targeted the general population, and social assistance was given to poor individuals and families on an ad hoc basis. For workers, short-term working arrangement was the most important pillar, along with a ban on dismissals. For small and medium enterprises, credit and tax payments were delayed and preferential financing options were provided. Nonetheless, most policies served the regular employees and business, and left out some of the most vulnerable groups such as informal workers and refugees. No measures were developed to specifically target these groups. Over the course of the pandemic, policy-making was influenced through lobbying and information sharing by employer associations, while trade unions and civil society organizations were not included at any stage. The stable forms of social dialogue, such as the National Tripartite Council, was defunct. In sum, social dialogue failed to target the specific needs of vulnerable groups. But social partners increased their legitimacy among the public by raising awareness and being vocal about vulnerable groups and policy areas that central government did not address. All partners highlighted the importance of inclusiveness and the need to institutionalize social dialogue mechanisms.